Arlo had been flying for 6 hours straight when he heard it. It was a small sound, easy to miss. A soft scraping like claws dragging slowly across metal. He thought it was the cargo shifting at first. That happened sometimes on long runs, when the weight settled wrong and the crates knocked against each other. He ignored it and kept his eyes on the horizon. But then it came again. Arlo set the ship to hold its course and pushed himself up from the pilot's seat. He rolled his shoulders, picked up the small hand lamp from beside the controls, and walked toward the back of the ship. The corridor was narrow and dim. The engine hum was low and steady beneath his boots. He passed the small kitchen, past the sleeping cabin, and stopped at the door to the cargo hold. He listened. Silence. He almost turned back. But something kept him standing there. Something in his gut told him the sound was real. He pressed the door open and stepped inside. The hold was cold and dark. Crates were stacked from floor to ceiling along both walls, tied down with thick straps. Arlo moved the lamp slowly across the room, checking each corner. Nothing looked out of place. The crates were all sealed. The straps were tight. Everything looked exactly as he had packed it 2 days ago. He was about to leave when the lamp caught something near the far corner. 2 pairs of eyes. They were low to the ground, half hidden behind the largest crate in the row. The eyes were pale and sharp, catching the light the way an animal's eyes do in the dark. Arlo went very still. He did not reach for anything. He did not call out. He just stood there and let his lamp fall on them slowly, carefully, so as not to frighten whatever was hiding there. What he saw stopped him cold. They were dragons. Small ones, but dragons without question. 2 of them pressed together in the tight space behind the crate. Their scales were dull and dry, the color of old ash, and their ribs showed clearly beneath the skin. Their wings were folded tight against their backs, trembling. The larger one had her arm around the smaller one, holding her close, and her eyes were fixed on Arlo with a hard, desperate look. Not angry. Afraid. The kind of afraid that had been going on for a long time. The smaller one had her face tucked against her sister's side. One of her wings was bent at a wrong angle, the thin membrane torn near the edge. It had not been treated. It looked days old. Arlo did not move for a long moment. He had hauled cargo across a dozen trade routes. He had landed on rough ground, in bad weather, in places most pilots avoided. He had seen a lot of strange things in his years of flying. But he had never found stowaways. And he had never found anything that looked at him the way that larger dragon was looking at him now. Like she was ready to fight with the last of whatever strength she had left, just to protect the smaller one behind her. He took one slow step back. The larger dragon flinched. Her lip pulled back and she showed small, sharp teeth. A low sound came from her throat. Not loud. More like a warning she did not have the energy to make louder. Arlo raised one hand, palm open, and stayed still. He did not speak. He did not reach toward them. He just held his hand up for a moment, then lowered it slowly. Then he turned and walked back out of the hold and pulled the door shut behind him. He stood in the corridor for a moment, thinking. They were starving. That much was clear. The torn wing on the smaller one needed looking at. They were young, he thought, though he could not be certain. Young and exhausted and terrified, hiding in the back of a cargo ship with nowhere else to go. He walked to the kitchen. He had one proper meal left in the cold box. He had been saving it, planning to eat it that evening. It was nothing special, just a thick stew with bread, the kind of food that was warm and heavy and filled the stomach well. He heated it up on the small stove until steam rose from it, then he poured it into the 2 largest bowls he owned. He filled a third bowl with water and carried all 3 back toward the hold. He set the door open just wide enough to slide the bowls inside. He pushed them gently across the floor, far enough in that the dragons could reach them without coming close to the door. Then he straightened up, stepped back, and pulled the door nearly shut again, leaving just a thin gap. He stood there for a moment in the corridor. He did not hear anything from inside the hold. No movement. No sound at all. But he did not need to. He had done what he could do right now, and that was enough for tonight. He walked back to the cockpit, sat down in his seat, and looked out at the open sky ahead of him. The stars were sharp and still, the way they always were out here, far from any city or port. The ship hummed quietly around him. The course was steady. He thought about the 2 pairs of eyes in the dark. He thought about the way the larger one had held the smaller one close, even when she was shaking. He did not know where they had come from. He did not know how long they had been hiding back there. He did not know what he was going to do next. He only knew they were hungry and afraid. And right now, that was the only thing that mattered. The next morning, Arlo made 2 bowls of food and carried them to the hold door without a word. He did not open the door wide. He just pushed it open enough to slide the bowls inside, the same way he had done the night before. He added a bowl of water beside them. Then he straightened up and walked back to the cockpit. No waiting. No watching. He simply left the food and went back to his work. An hour later he walked past the hold on his way to check the engine panel. He glanced through the thin gap in the door. The bowls were empty. He said nothing. He just picked them up, rinsed them in the kitchen and went about his day. That was how the first day passed. On the second morning, Arlo was sitting in the cockpit running through his instrument checks when he felt it. A presence. Quiet and still just behind his left shoulder. He did not turn around. He kept his eyes on the controls and continued what he was doing, moving slowly and without any sharp motion. He reached forward and adjusted a dial. He checked the fuel reading. He wrote a number down on the small notepad he kept beside the seat. He talked while he worked. Not to anyone in particular. Just out loud, the way he always did when he was alone on a long run. "Fuel's holding steady," he said quietly. "Wind's calm up here. Should make good time today." He paused and tapped the navigation screen with one finger. Heading looks clean. No weather to worry about. He could feel the presence still there behind him. Listening. Not moving. He did not look back. He just kept talking in the same low, easy voice, the same way he talked to his ship when something needed saying and there was no one else to say it to. After a while, the presence was gone. He turned his head slowly and looked at the corridor. Empty. He turned back to the controls and kept working. That evening, when he carried the food bowls back to the hold, he saw her. She was standing in the corridor just outside the hold door. The larger one. She was thin and still a little unsteady on her feet, but she was standing upright, watching him with those pale sharp eyes. Her wings were folded close. Her tail moved once, slow and low, then went still. Arlo stopped where he was. He held the bowls out at his side so she could see them clearly. Then he crouched down and set them on the floor, right there in the corridor, closer to her than he had placed them before. He added the water bowl beside them. Then he stood up and took 2 steps back and leaned against the corridor wall with his arms loose at his sides. She looked at the bowls. She looked at him. She looked at the bowls again. Then she walked forward, slow and careful, and lowered her head and began to eat. Arlo stayed where he was and did not move. Her name, he would come to learn much later, was Sable. But that night she was just a hungry young dragon eating from a bowl in his corridor while he stood a few feet away and watched the wall above her head, giving her the small dignity of not being stared at. The smaller one, Ren, did not appear. But she had stopped making the low warning sounds from inside the hold. That was something. The third morning brought a problem. Arlo was heating water in the kitchen when he noticed Sable standing in the doorway of the hold with a look on her face that he could not quite read. She was looking down at something low near the floor. He walked over and looked past her into the hold. Ren was huddled in the corner, her small body curled tight. Her torn wing was stretched out slightly, and even from the doorway Arlo could see that it was worse than before. The skin around the tear was swollen and dark. She had been favoring it for days and it had not been given any care. Arlo looked at the wing. Then he looked at Sable. Sable looked back at him. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes said what she could not say in words. She was asking him something and they both knew it. Arlo held up one finger. He walked to the small storage cabinet at the end of the corridor and opened it. Inside, behind the spare parts and the toolkit, he kept a basic medical box. He took it down and opened it on the corridor floor where Sable could see everything inside. He held up the bandage roll so she could see it clearly. Then he held up a small bottle of cleaning solution. He did not move toward the hold. He just waited. Sable watched him for a long moment. Then she turned and went back inside the hold and sat down beside Ren. Arlo understood. He picked up the box and walked in slowly, keeping low, keeping his movements small and calm. Ren pressed herself into the corner when he came close, but Sable put her wing around her and made a low, steady sound, soft and even. Ren went still. Arlo worked carefully and quietly. He cleaned the wound as gently as he could. He wrapped the wing with the bandage, not too tight, keeping it supported without pulling. He did not rush. When he was done, he closed the medical box, stood up slowly, and walked back out of the hold without looking back. The next morning, both bowls were waiting by the hold door when he woke up. He had not put them there. He stood and looked at them for a moment. Then he picked them up, filled them, and carried them to the kitchen table. He set them down on one side and sat on the other. He heard small footsteps in the corridor. Then 2 small dragons came and sat down across from him. And that was how the third day began. It started with a word. Arlo was washing the bowls after breakfast when he heard Sable say something behind him. It was quiet, just one short sound, rough around the edges like she was not used to making it with her mouth. He turned slowly and looked at her. She was standing near the kitchen doorway. Ren was beside her, smaller and still careful around him, but no longer pressing herself against the wall. Sable's pale eyes were steady and serious. She said the word again. Gone. Arlo set the bowl down. He turned to face her fully and gave her his whole attention. He did not speak. He just waited. Sable looked at the floor for a moment. Then she looked back up at him. She pressed one clawed hand flat against her chest. Then she pointed to Ren. Then she held both hands open, side by side, like she was showing him something that used to exist. Then she closed her hands slowly. Both of them. All the way shut. Arlo understood that. He did not need words for it. He pulled out the chair beside him and sat down. He folded his hands on the table and stayed quiet, letting her know he was listening and that he was not going anywhere. Sable came slowly into the kitchen. She did not sit. She stood at the edge of the table and began to speak in the only way she could, with the few words she had, and the rest filled in with her hands and her eyes and the way her body moved when certain things were too heavy for any word to carry. Came out in pieces. Slow and broken but clear enough. Their father had been a dragon lord. Not the biggest, not the most powerful, but respected. He had held land and he had kept peace between 3 clans for a long time. Their home had been high in the Stone Mountains, and Sable said the word for it, something Arlo could not repeat, but the way she said it told him it had been good. It had been safe. Then something changed. Another clan came. Larger. Hungry for the land their father held. They did not come with a challenge or with warning. They came at night, and they came with numbers, and it was over before their father could gather anyone to stand beside him. Sable stopped talking for a moment. Her jaw tightened. She looked at a point on the wall just past Arlo's shoulder and was quiet for several seconds. Then she kept going. She and Ren had been in the lower caves when it happened. A servant had come running, an old one who had been with their family since before Sable was born, and he had pushed them toward a tunnel and told them to run and not to stop. Sable said she had wanted to go back. She had wanted to fight even though she was young and it would have meant nothing. But Ren was there. Ren was small and hurt and frightened. So Sable ran. They had been running ever since. Arlo listened to all of it without saying a word. He did not lean forward with questions. He did not look at her with pity, which he suspected she would not want. He just sat at his table in his small kitchen on his small ship and listened to a young dragon tell him the worst thing that had ever happened to her, in a language that was not her own, because it was the only one they shared. When she stopped, the kitchen was very quiet. Ren had come in at some point during the telling. She was sitting on the floor near the doorway, her bandaged wing folded carefully, her eyes on her sister's face. Arlo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry about your father." Sable looked at him. She did not say anything. But something in her face shifted just slightly. Like a door that had been bolted for a long time had moved a little on its hinge. Arlo stood up. He went to the cockpit and sat down in front of the navigation screen. He looked at his current route. It was the standard one, the one he always took, the one that passed through 2 busy trade ports before reaching his destination. Fast, familiar, and completely wrong for what was needed now. He thought for a moment. Then he began to adjust the course. There was a stretch of territory far to the east, past the open flatlands and beyond the second ridge of hills, where no single clan held power and no bounty runner liked to work. Neutral ground. Not comfortable, not easy to reach, but safe in the way that mattered. The kind of place where 2 young dragons with no clan and no protection might be able to breathe for a while without looking over their shoulders. It would add 2 days to his run. His delivery would be late. He would have to send a message ahead and offer a discount he could not really afford. He changed the course anyway. He did not go back to the kitchen and announce what he had done. He did not tell Sable to look at the new heading or explain his thinking. He simply made the change and then walked back through the corridor and picked up the medical box to check on Ren's wing. But Sable was standing in the corridor when he came out of the cockpit. She had seen the navigation screen change through the open door. She was looking at him with an expression he could not fully read. He held up the medical box. "Wing first," he said simply. Sable was quiet for a moment. Then she stepped aside and let him through. She did not say thank you. She did not need to. Some things did not need words, and both of them were beginning to understand that about each other. The warning light came on just before dawn. Arlo was in the pilot's seat, half asleep with a cup of cold tea in his hand, when the proximity alarm blinked red on the panel in front of him. He sat up straight and set the cup down. He leaned forward and looked at the screen. 2 ships. Coming in fast from the left side, cutting across his heading at an angle that was not accidental. Nobody flew that line by mistake. It was a blocking move, the kind used by people who wanted to stop something from reaching where it was going. Arlo's hands moved across the controls quietly and quickly. He pulled up what detail the scanner could give him. The ships were not military. No markings he recognized. They were built low and narrow, the kind of frame that was made for speed and not much else. Fast ships. Aggressive ships. Hunter ships. He exhaled slowly through his nose. They were 1 hour from the neutral zone. Maybe a little less if he pushed the engine. But those two ships were already closing the gap, and a third blip had just appeared on the far right side of the screen, coming around from behind. 3 of them. They had planned this. They had known his route. Arlo reached back and knocked twice on the wall behind his seat. He heard movement in the corridor almost immediately. Sable appeared in the cockpit doorway a moment later, her pale eyes sharp and alert. She had not been fully asleep either. Ren was just behind her, smaller but standing steady, her bandaged wing held close. Arlo pointed at the scanner screen without speaking. Sable looked at it. She went very still. Then she said one word, low and hard, in her own language. Arlo did not know what it meant, but he understood the tone. She knew what those ships were. She had been expecting something like this, somewhere in the back of her mind, since the day they had run. Ren made a small sound. Sable put one hand back and touched her sister's shoulder without looking at her. Steady. Hold steady. Arlo turned back to the controls. I'm going to try to run past the left side, he said, keeping his voice even. I need a few minutes. He pushed the engine up and felt the ship shudder beneath him as it picked up speed. The two ships on the left adjusted instantly, spreading apart to close the gap he was aiming for. They were fast. Faster than he had hoped. The first shot came in wide, a warning. It hit nothing, but it was close enough to make the ship rock. Arlo did not flinch. He cut the heading hard to the right, dropped the altitude sharply, and fired one of his signal decoys into the space behind them. The decoy burned bright and hot, the same heat signature as his engine. The ship on the right veered toward it for just a moment. Just a moment was enough. Arlo swung left again and pushed through the gap before the two front ships could close it. The hull scraped the edge of a shot that came in from below, and something in the back of the ship cracked and groaned but held. Now would be good, he said not loudly to the doorway behind him. He heard the side hatch open. What the hunters had expected was a cargo pilot with no weapons and 2 starving young dragons who could barely stand. What they found was something else entirely. Sable came out of that hatch like she had been waiting her whole life for the moment. She was not the thin, trembling creature that had hidden behind a crate 5 days ago. She had eaten. She had rested. She had slept without running for the first time in weeks. And she was angry in the deep and quiet way that only comes from losing everything and then finally having something worth protecting. She hit the nearest ship hard from above, her claws finding the engine housing on the back. The ship lurched and spun, and its second shot went wide into empty sky. Ren came out a moment after her sister, smaller but faster, darting underneath the third ship and striking at its underside with a precision that surprised even Arlo when he caught it on the side camera. The radio crackled. Someone on one of the hunter ships was shouting. Arlo did not listen to what they said. He was busy. He threw the ship into a low rolling turn and fired his second decoy straight at the lead ship's nose. The pilot veered hard to avoid it and lost his attack line completely. Arlo swung around behind him and used the ship's cargo brace, the heavy magnetic clamp on the underside, to knock the hunter's rear stabilizer as he passed over. It was not a weapon. It was a cargo tool. But at that speed it worked well enough. The lead ship dropped away, trailing smoke. Outside, Sable had driven the second ship back far enough that its pilot had clearly decided the contract was not worth his life. It turned and ran. The third ship, the one Ren had struck underneath, was listing badly to one side and making no more aggressive moves. Then all 3 were gone. The sky went quiet. Arlo let out a long breath and eased the engine back. His hands were steady, but his heart was loud in his chest. He checked the damage panel. The back left section had taken a hit. One of the cargo straps had snapped. The hull was holding, but only just. The side hatch closed. A minute later, Sable appeared in the cockpit doorway again. There was a small cut along her jaw. She was breathing hard. Ren was beside her, eyes bright, her good wing half open. Arlo looked at them both. Good crew, he said quietly. Sable said nothing. But for the first time since he had found them hiding in the dark behind his crates, she almost smiled. The ship was dying slowly and Arlo knew it. He could hear it in the way the engine sound had changed, dropping from its usual steady hum to something rougher and uneven, like a heartbeat that had lost its rhythm. The damage panel on the cockpit wall was showing 4 red lights where there had been none before the fight. The back left section of the hull had taken the worst of it, and the air recycler was struggling, pulling thin where it should have been full and steady. Arlo worked the controls quietly, trying to coax more from the ship than it had left to give. He rerouted what power he could from the cargo systems to the engine. He shut down everything that was not necessary. Lights in the back corridor. The heating unit in the kitchen. The secondary scanner. One by one he turned them off, buying the ship a little more time with each one. It was not enough. The engine coughed once hard and the whole ship shuddered. The lights in the cockpit flickered. The navigation screen went dark for 3 full seconds before it came back on, dimmer than before. Arlo looked at the heading. The neutral zone was close. 40 minutes, maybe less if the engine held. The engine was not going to hold 40 minutes. He sat back in his seat and looked at the screen for a moment. Then he turned around. Sable and Ren were both standing in the corridor behind him. They had felt the shudder. They were watching him with the careful attention of 2 creatures who had learned very quickly how to read a situation. Arlo stood up. He kept his voice calm and clear. "The neutral zone is close," he said. "You can see the heading on the screen. 40 minutes flying, maybe less if you push. You are both strong enough now." He looked at them steadily. "You should go." Neither of them moved. Arlo tried again. "The hull is cracking in the back. The air is going to get thin in here. There is no reason for you to stay on a ship that is falling apart when you can fly." Ren looked at her sister. Sable did not look back at her. She was looking at Arlo, and her pale eyes were very steady and very serious. Then Sable spoke. She did not speak the way she had in the kitchen 3 days ago, in broken pieces with long gaps between them. She spoke slowly and carefully, choosing each word like she was placing something fragile down on a table. "You found us," she said. "You fed us. You did not ask what we were or where we came from. You fixed Ren's wing." She paused for just a moment. "You changed your path for us. You fought for us." Arlo opened his mouth. Sable kept going. "A life debt does not end," she said, "because it becomes difficult. That is not what a debt is." The cockpit was quiet. Outside the window, the sky was dark and wide and empty. The engine made its rough, uneven sound beneath them. Arlo looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Ren, who was standing with her chin up and her good wing half open, ready. He sat back down in the pilot's seat. "All right," he said simply. Sable moved into the cockpit and stood beside the navigation screen. She looked at it for a moment, then she looked out the forward window at the sky ahead. She was quiet, reading something in it that Arlo could not see. Dragons, he was learning, carried maps inside them the way some people carried old songs. Things passed down and remembered without being written anywhere. "Left," she said. 3 degrees. There is a current there. It will carry the ship." Arlo adjusted the heading without questioning it. He felt it almost immediately. A subtle shift, like the ship had found a slope it could lean into. The engine did not have to push as hard. The rough sound smoothed out slightly. Not fixed, not even close, but easier. He looked at Sable. She was still watching the sky, her eyes moving slowly across it like she was reading a page. Behind them, Ren had already gone to the back of the ship. Arlo heard her moving through the corridor, heard the scratch of small claws on the floor. Then he heard something else. A steady, careful sound, close and precise, coming from the back left section of the hull. He looked at the damage panel. One of the red lights flickered. Then it went to orange. He did not fully understand what Ren was doing, but he understood the result. She was running her claws along the cracks in the hull, pressing the edges together, her scales rough enough and strong enough to hold what the metal could no longer hold on its own. It would not last forever. It did not need to. It only needed to last long enough. The air recycler steadied. Arlo exhaled. For the next 30 minutes, the 3 of them worked without stopping. Sable called out small course corrections every few minutes, reading the sky ahead with a patience and a certainty that Arlo found himself trusting completely. Ren moved along the hull, finding each new crack before it could open further. Arlo kept the engine alive through sheer stubbornness and the kind of quiet focus that came from years of flying ships that had no business still being in the air. The neutral zone appeared on the scanner with 12 minutes to spare. They crossed the boundary with the engine running on almost nothing, the hull held together in 3 places by dragon claws and determination, and the cockpit lit by a single working light above Arlo's head. When the rescue ship found them and pulled alongside, the first thing the rescuer asked when he came aboard was how Arlo had made it through with damage that bad. Arlo was sitting on the floor of the cockpit, his back against the seat, too tired to stand. Sable was beside him, her shoulder almost touching his. Ren was asleep across both their feet, her bandaged wing rising and falling slowly. Arlo looked up at the rescuer. Then he looked at the 2 sisters beside him. "I had good crew," he said. And he meant every word of it.